you all on the potential here. We've got an amazing group of panels, so let's not wait too long. Let's jump right in. So Bitcoin Asia is over, so we can immediately start talking shit about Bitcoin Magazine. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I love the Bitcoin Magazine folks. So they recently defined an L2, and what they did, it was pretty divisive, right? It was pretty questionable, but I think it's a great thing to start off with for the panelists to talk about what is a Bitcoin L2? Does it fit the Bitcoin Magazine definition of using Bitcoin as the native asset, using Bitcoin for settlement, and having a functional dependency on Bitcoin? What are the characteristics that are required and maybe optional? Start with you, Matt.
So, obviously, this whole L2 discussion is circular, ridiculous. Everyone's fighting for them to be an L2, for no one else to be an L2. We saw this play out on other chains. On Ethereum, we saw new terms, new definitions. It's not useful. So we know that the definition of L2 equals Lightning is not predictive at all, right? So when people say you can only be an L2 if you have unilateral exit, then nothing but Lightning will be an L2 for the foreseeable future until we have a software primitive point. So I think we know that that's too strict. But I think what Bitcoin Magazine gets right is they say that Bitcoin has to be the asset. I think the most important thing for me when you're talking about scaling Bitcoin is scaling Bitcoin the asset. If you just want to make Bitcoin work the same way it does, but bigger or faster, that's not where the market is anymore. Yeah.
That's a great answer.
So I'm Cecilia, and I'm CMO and also co-founder for Miriam. So Miriam is like a decentralized staking protocol. So we really try to, use a more trustless way to scale Bitcoin and making Bitcoin holders extra yield.
The question was, what was the why L2?
Yeah, defining an L2.
So we, my project Alex, we started about 3 years ago, looking to build the DeFi on Bitcoin. So when the term BTC5, whatever people are talking about, didn't really exist. I think when you talk about L2, and I mean the Bitcoin Magazine, what they say has some truth in it. I think they're rather technical, but from the user experience, what you need to think about is what do we mean by L2, and why do we need an L2 if you like. Now, in the first place, then what are we doing on L1? Because what we are trying to achieve on L2 is really alternative to what you're doing on L1, right? And now that refers to asset issuance and trading. Now, specifically, where we are focusing on is DeFi, for example. And where the L2 is important, in particular for Bitcoin, and I think this is something that's not appreciated, because L2 in the minds of the Bitcoin builders of DeFi takes far more importance when it comes to its need compared to the L2 in the EVM, because Bitcoin doesn't have the virtual machine, and therefore if you want to do DeFi, you've got to have a smart contract layer, which unfortunately we're calling L2, but it's a really question of enabling smart contract capability in the manner that we are familiar with that will allow us to scale. And that to me, from the user and practical point perspective, is what L2 means, more than anything else.
I love that. Would you agree that users mostly want to use Bitcoin the asset?
Sorry?
Would you agree that Bitcoin users want to use Bitcoin the asset?
I think, you see, the reason why we're building on L2 on Bitcoin is because we want to, there's a reason for it. And the fact that we are talking about Bitcoin that has the biggest market cap, therefore, we want to use Bitcoin in a way that is more productive. Now, oftentimes people talk about, well, why do you need to have a L2 on the Bitcoin when you have a WBTC? You can easily bring the Bitcoin to the WBTC and do everything with the EVM. There are reasons why, again, I think the most important thing about having L2 on Bitcoin is because you can separate where you keep your assets and what you do with it. So important thing is how do you bring the Bitcoin to L2 and do what you want to do, and how do you bring it back? And I think that round trip consideration, because every Bitcoin holder holds Bitcoin because of its property that is secure. you do not want to exchange, or you're happy to do something with it. The question is, does it coming back to my Bitcoin wallet?
Yeah, I think that's a great high-level explanation of why scaling Bitcoin now is separating Bitcoin the asset from Bitcoin the rail. And I think that's a trade-off that maybe years ago people didn't think was acceptable, but I think now the Bitcoin community is largely open to, which is really exciting, and is one of the reasons all the people here on stage. So, John, you actually started off going down, my next line of questioning that I thought was really interesting was, Bitcoin is currently, half the market cap, but it's just a tiny fraction of today. What are we getting wrong? Why? How do we solve all Bitcoin alternatives?
See, that's a very exciting question because everyone is talking about, oh my God, Bitcoin has like 1.3 trillion market cap. And imagine we have a DeFi on Bitcoin. And let's say we get 20% of that. We're talking about a humongous number, right? What people don't realize, Bitcoin is at 1.3 trillion market cap, despite the fact that we don't have an ecosystem that we are supporting. So imagine that we are building a proper ecosystem and additional economic activity on Bitcoin and its impact in terms of the Bitcoin price. I think that is going to be very meaningful. Now, the reason why, and I talked about it in some of the other places as well, I think the reason why it didn't happen so far is because number one, in terms of opportunity, Bitcoin holders and ETH holders, I think they are fundamentally different in one aspect. Bitcoin holders want to keep Bitcoin as is. Yeah, and Bitcoin doesn't support the virtual machine, so there are a certain amount of reservation and worry actually towards smart contract, funnily enough. Yeah. So what that means is the opportunities for you to deploy Bitcoin has to compensate for that. Now, I don't think such opportunities really existing. Okay, that's one thing. The question is, going back to what I said earlier, how can I bring my Bitcoin back? And I think there's a lot of infrastructure that was lacking, which with the help of the measure of thesis and also yourself in the mirror, we are looking to address, and us included.
So we actually try to solve the problem as well. And in terms of like the studio, so we really think that for now, like we try to like believe that BTC L1 will do something, right? But the truth is that we do need L2 first. And if like the tech is developed like super like later, and then we believe that something can do on layer one as well. So at the current stage, we try to bring the so-called like 1.3 like trillion asset like to other ecosystem because there were like more like DeFi or applications on the other chains, right? But we still want to see like lots of like infra like projects like Chen is doing that happening like in like different layer twos like Merlin, layers, stuff like that.
I think a different way to look at it might be that we have WBTC, and the last time it grew was summer 2020. And since then, it spiked a little, but it's mostly gone down. And so we have to ask ourselves, if people are more interested in Bitcoin DeFi, why hasn't WBTC grown as well? And obviously, there's been this different evolutionary path of Bitcoin holders and people who use other chains. But there's also been a bit of an object lesson because what I've seen over the years is that Bitcoiners have used FTX and BlockFi and all of these others as an alternative because it's a lot easier than DeFi. And then they got burned. And so most big depositors that I'm talking to, actually, they were fine with using their Bitcoin once. And then they were told a lesson. So now we have to convince them that they've been burned, that they should try again.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. And what Channel was saying is really correct, that Bitcoiners are unique in that they want to earn more Bitcoin. And there's definitely a lot of battle spots, like Matt was saying. And that's also where some of these risk-plus opportunities like staking from Mesos or from Core are quite appealing because you don't need to trust a centralized institution or a desk or anything like that. So kind of talking about other issues that we currently have in the layer space is there's not nearly enough Bitcoin developers. How do we go about bringing more developers into this space?
hire them, train them. Like, I mean, a lot of this just came from Bitcoin Asia, and if people can afford all those fancy booths, they can afford to help someone go through the mailing list and read up. I really think that the only way we solve that problem is by letting the market solve the problem. So instead of hand-wringing about this isn't good for Bitcoin or that isn't good for Bitcoin, look, Bitcoin doesn't give a shit what we think is good for it. It's going to be fine. What we need to do is like capitalism do its work. And if you need a Bitcoin developer, hire someone, take a chance on someone, and then teach you.
For us, that we really like the chain tech people, so we use lots of them, and because we have like the connection with our developers, so it's not like a super issue for us. But I would see that there will be a trend that with the technology like this, going more deeper, that we definitely need like more talent like joining on the Western side as well.
I mean, I think when you talk about Bitcoin builders, a lot of people talk about, the Bitcoin builders, we don't have many, or compared to EVM and so on, because building on Bitcoin is hard, for example, and then people come up with many excuses, rationale. But for me, the way I see this, you see, most of the Web3 developers I come across Bitcoin, EVM, Solana, and so on, they are top-notch developers. From their perspective, learning a new language isn't really an issue. You give them 2-3 days, and the fact is, nowadays, they don't even need to learn a new language because most of the L2s support EVM. So what are we talking about here? We are really talking about the opportunity set. Programmers are some of the most logical people. They calculate, and if it doesn't make money for you, they're not coming to us. And that money simply didn't exist enough on building on Bitcoin compared to, for example, EVM and Solana. Again, many EVM developers went to Solana and learned a new language. Yeah? So that's the first point. The second point, however, is probably more subtle than on the technical side. One of the difficulties we have when people say building on Bitcoin is hard is because Bitcoin and the EVM, for example, have a different models. If you want to build, for example, DeFi on Bitcoin, you need to understand the difference between UTXO model and account model at the moment, unless you can come up with a DeFi construct in the UTXO, and some people are trying, and I think that's a very novel way. You need to understand how to gel them together. It's not something that was done in elsewhere or much. So I think that paradigm shifts does put some barrier to entry, but ultimately I think it is opportunity set which is growing every day. So I don't think it's really the adoption issue that is going to cause a problem.
Yeah, no, another great answer. For all the Bitcoin people, like Bitcoin curious developers, there's a great amount of people there that you can come talk to learn more. It's really an amazing time to join the Bitcoin developer space. While we're on the topic of like Bitcoin developers and decentralized applications, we're in a really interesting time now where it's an adjacent narrative, right? Like it's on the way to becoming like a full thing. And when things are nascent, there's a lot of opportunities to maybe partner versus directly compete. And that's an interesting kind of paradigm. A lot of people view crypto as zero sum versus positive sum. And I think that's kind of a mistaken viewpoint sometimes. And I'm curious for the panelists when they think about partnering maybe in this case in L2s or maybe other DeFi applications as well. Is now the time to partner or is now the time to compete?
Partner, or the pie. The way that we work is we are also auditors. We are also shipping applications on other L2s. And I think that, right now we don't even know if this idea of a Bitcoin L2 is going to be accepted by the market at all. So the idea that being winner take all, I think, is a mistake. But it is still hard, even when people want to grow the pie. It's like, who got this headline, who got that, who got the best spot at the conference. But it's us against apathy rather than player versus player, I think.
From what I see is also like lots of collaboration. Like for example, that because I came from like Chinese background, so lots of those like Chinese like layer twos, they will ask me that if you want this collaboration, we will all go like, yeah, for sure, why not? And whatever that if we can contribute to each other, and let's just say TBL, right? So maybe you know like some Bitcoin miners that I don't know, or I know some people that I can like bring judgment as well. That's just one part. The other thing is like, for example, when we were saying that we're decentralized staking protocol, then people immediately compete us with like compare us with like Babylon. So I think in a way that what we try to do is a little bit like Babylon, that we try to bring the TBL to other like developed like omni chains. So however that we use different technology with Babylon as well, and I do think that there's lots of interesting things going on, and we will all find out different partnerships.
I think I've been talking about the most important thing is making Pi bigger, and that often people interpret as a partnership, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But also, I would say it is the competition that causes innovation and that drives the enlargement of the Pi. So I think they come both hand in hand. And even the history, a lot of even the zero-sum game as well. If you look at short-term, it's always a zero-sum game. But because that allows the pie to grow, if you look at the long term, it no longer becomes the zero-sum game. So it's a sort of question of what time horizon you're looking at. Now, when it comes to Alex, a lot of people sort of complain sometimes throughout our history, we do too much. And that's partly because we compete with so many projects. Now, that's partly because peculiarity of the Bitcoin, like a virtual machine, means composability is very hard. And when the composability is very hard, unless you have a very vertically integrated product suite, you cannot create the kind of user experience that you want to give to your user. So that creates competition to a certain extent. But what we are focusing on, for example, for X-Link, is to connect all the L2s that are emerging and bring the liquidity to them. So recently connected the Core, and we hope to soon connect with the Meso and the Mirror as well. So that is a partnership in a way helps each other. So I think that's how we really grow together.
Yeah, a bunch of great items there as well. There's still it's still so early, but there's so much opportunity for Bitcoin DeFi and these Bitcoin layers to start to rival some of the largest players in Ethereum. And something that I spend a lot of time about is thinking what things look like maybe a little bit in the future. And I'm curious, with all this innovation on the Bitcoin side, what do we think might happen to maybe Ethereum DeFi, or just given the size of maybe some of the Bitcoin L2s relative to some of the Ethereum L2s?
Well, if Bitcoin is the most decentralized network and it's replacing money, and if Solana has open finance and it's fast, what does Ethereum have? And I say this to someone who's done a lot of work in the Ethereum space, and what I love, what we can learn from them in Bitcoin is the enthusiasm and collaboration. Just like there's no idea that's off limits, and that's always been that's been a problem in Bitcoin for years. So, but I do struggle if we can execute well building Bitcoin L2s. I do struggle to see where Ethereum stands.
Well, I'm kind of like agree on like answer. I don't have anything to add.
I think, everyone talk about when Bitcoin is slow, there's a reason for it. And when Solana is fast, there's a reason for it. What does that leave with Ethereum? So I totally agree with you. But another thing is, if you look at most of the Bitcoin L2s, the fact is many of them are smart contract roll-up that roll up to Ethereum. So there is a large dependence on that still. So I don't think that's going to change. But technology aside, I think one thing interesting is actually, in my view, the proof of work versus proof of stake. And from the regulation perspective, what it will mean in terms of the security analysis. Now, the reason why we want to build on Bitcoin is we are of the view that proof of work will firmly put Bitcoin in non-security category. Now, if POS becomes, and I think that's what SEC wants to do, becomes a security, that will impact the whole ecosystem across not only Ethereum, but also Solana as well. And that may actually drive the builder and user to Bitcoin. Hypothetical, speculative?
I'm skeptical. I think that the SEC has been on the tear for sure. but I also think the courts have been slapping them around. And so, I mean, I guess how I think we should think about it is that that might happen, actually could. But we have to win regardless. So even if Ethereum tomorrow, the CFTC says it's a commodity and it never will have an issue, we have to give developers a better experience, more liquidity, more users.
Perhaps you can make a bet and then come back next year and see who we
Oh, excellent. That'd be great, yeah.
So I hear a one Bitcoin bet. But
A little risk, we'll see.
They'll be very expensive by next year.
Yeah.
But that's true. Yeah, it's a lot of challenge, and with Gary, it's so hard to predict, right? Like, it's such a weird time in the U.S. Hopefully, Gary's no longer here at the next conference, back in Hong Kong next year. And I think that will give a lot of security, not just to the developers of the space, but also to the users, right? Like, are we doing things that are okay or not? We've all wanted clarity. As with any Bitcoin panel, we got to talk about the SEC and Lightning very quickly, which is, I think I've got lost as part of this. And I think if we think about, kind of this emergence of technology, I'd be curious. For maybe we're now getting a little time for like a few predictions as we start to wrap some stuff up here. How many Bitcoin L2s do we think will be live and in production by the time this conference rolls back around next year?
I think we might want to be a little more specific. Are they self-identifying as Bitcoin L2s?
We'll go with self-identify.
No. Well, it's hard to imagine it'll be fewer than 100 at the rate that we're going right now. Even live, I'll say live, because you can just copy-paste Optimism stack, and then every other chain that launches, you can copy-paste that as well, right? Because, I mean, when we talk about collaboration versus competition, we're competing with each other, but we're forced to collaborate by the social norm of open source, right? But if you want to tighten the definition, it's hard for me to imagine that there will be more than 3 by the end of the year that are custodying Bitcoin and using Bitcoin as the native asset safely.
There's a lot of subtle points there that I hope the audience has caught on to.
For me, I would just make a joke that next year maybe there will only be like layer 3 and layer 4. That's my best friend Jason's favorite thing to mock me. But yeah, I mean, but that's a good thing, right? At least users get more benefit, right? They get layer 2 cut.
So from our perspective, because we're not L2 ourselves, we look to work with our L2. So we actually have a tracker that tracks all the L2 projects. Currently, we have 123 projects that we track. Now, they're increasing by 1 project a day. So that's the way we see. Now, from our perspective, we expect between 10 to 20 L2 projects to go live this year. And we are currently connecting to each network 1 chain a week. So that's sort of the pace that we see.
So I'm slow. I haven't connected, right?
I know. It's but it does take time. But so it's coming soon. But the fact is, but then you need to think about. You see how many years it actually took for the EVM L2s to be where it is, and then that 10, 20 L2s coming all online. The thing is, we didn't talk about today, but liquidity fragmentation is going to be a massive issue. And I think you made a very good point. Which one of those L2s will actually custody Bitcoin in a safe way, and who will be the winner? And I think that will be actually very, very interesting into next year. Hopefully, all 2 of you, and then myself will be part of the survivors. But let's see.
Yeah, by 3 I meant us 3, obviously.
Oh, 3, you meant us.
Yeah. They're right here.
All right, so let's see if we can get one more prediction here. This one's a little more like broad. So let's go with like maybe 2-3 years from now. What percentage of Bitcoin transactions or transactions involving Bitcoin, maybe let's call it, take place on Bitcoin L1 versus on these layer 2 systems? And I know that's a little interesting at like an Ordinals focus conference, but I'm curious for the takes of the panelists.
So I mean, that's why actually I'm very bullish. Now again, I go back to earlier what I said. About 20% of the ETH market cap is DeFi and so on. So a lot of people think that's a great number, but I think there's a certain reason why that's the case. In that a lot of ETH holders holding ETH in the centralized exchange don't actually participate in the smart contract. And the ETH ethos and so on, Ethereum, is about trustless, on-chain alone, sort of connecting off the off-chain and things like that. Now, where I am bullish with the Bitcoin DeFi over the next 2 or 3 years is because Bitcoin doesn't support the virtual machine, you've got to have a multi-sig, you've got to introduce the trust. What does that mean? People are already talking about something called CDeFi, for example. Where I am really interested in is the melding of the on-chain and off-chain. Now, when that happens, it really doesn't matter whether you're holding Bitcoin on centralized exchange or on-chain wallet. So you accessing finance is finance. And that means potentially DeFi, TVL, as a percentage of the overall Bitcoin market cap can reach 100%. And including leverage, it can actually grow bigger than Bitcoin market cap. So to me, that is, again, I'm very, hypothetical here. I'm biased, obviously, but I think it is real, there's a real chance to that because of the merging, this unique opportunity of merging off-chain and on-chain provided by the unique property of the Bitcoin itself.
I think it's really hard to say. I think people are trying so hard to build on their one, and I like to see that. And to be honest, I don't know how long the L2 narrative will go now. But at the end, we all looking for the same goal. That is better user experience. I do think retailers, they don't really care about sex or facts, but they care about safety. They care about speed. So yeah, that's my answer.
So I don't think the L2s are going to be moving the successful L2s. They're going to be moving Bitcoin. I think they're largely going to be moving other assets by volume. And I think that we'll see L1 to L2 transactions are going to be rich, but then people are mostly going to be borrowing against their Bitcoin rather than sending it around and then playing games with their less strong money, right? In 3 to 4 years, in 15 years, my goal is to see 25% of the world's economy running on Bitcoin. So, yeah, we got a lot of work to do up here.
There's no way to finish a panel without a big bold vision. So I love it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.